Today's talk is titled Remixing Mixed Emotions. We're going to have a little club experience later. So that's my funny joke. And basically searching for a timescale of intra-individual dynamics. So we've been talking about these emotions, and implicitly we've been saying they exist on some timescale, but we haven't been totally explicit yet about what that timescale might be. Okay, so thanks to NIA, NICHD funders, and all these people who are presenting work that other people have contributed a lot to, so I want to thank them explicitly. The problem is that the names all get smaller as the range of collaborators gets bigger and bigger, but it's great to work with all these people and institutions. Okay, so I'm coming from an intra-individual variability perspective. And there's a lot of constructs out there that have these names: emo variability, affect variability, lability, emotional inertia, complexity, synchrony, diversity. In some cases, it's the same mathematics that are behind constructs with different names and different theories. Here we have a person who has high within-person variability and a person who has low. We can collect those together into distributions. So we have and characterize those based upon the within-person standard deviation. And a little bit later, we'll do this in multiple dimensions. So this is an entropy statistic, and you can see that a person sort of lives within the hill of where their reports are given. And also in a categorical space, we can talk about diversity in multiple categories. So person on the bottom has low diversity, person on the high has, the person on the upper person has high diversity. Okay, so 3 ideas and questions in 20 minutes. Mixed emotions into emotion diversity, and we're going to try to cross a whole bunch of levels of analysis here, all the way from nations down to cells eventually, if we can get that far. Timescales for the study of the remix, and that's how fast does the mix change. So if we can use the dynamics to try to understand when mixed emotions are happening and how long it takes them to fade away as well. And we'll try to take that from years down to seconds. And you'll see up in the corner here, I see everybody fascinated by this. These are people from Midas, all with emotion diversity. They're different emotion diversity maps of these different people. Okay, and then finally intra-individual dynamics, and talking about trying to resolve the categorical paradigms with the dimensional paradigms, and maybe trying to do this through a reaction diffusion model. And this is just an idea that we're going to throw out there. Okay, so levels of analysis working from Bronfenbrenner's levels. I won't spend a lot of time on this. Big stuff on the outside and the person and within the person on the inside. And then we can couple those, and usually they're coupled implicitly with different timescales. So sociocultural change happens on a long timescale, and we'll do within-person change on a year-to-year timescale, sort of across the adult lifespan, and we'll go down all the way to seconds. And of course then, both the core affect and the functionalist perspectives are often integrated together within a circumplex, where the entire circumplex is described by 2 dimensions, and then the discrete emotions are placed within quadrants along those 2 dimensions. And we'll try to integrate those 2 things together through the dynamics. Okay, so in ecological perspective, we'll go from biodiversity. So species interact with each other and with the environment, and each species plays a functional role in that environment. And in that literature, they talk about the diversity of species as being a marker of ecological health. So if we remove one species, then the health of the entire ecosystem may come into question. Or if an invasive species comes in, they may drive out some species and bring health into question as well. So the important thing is that there are a bunch of species that are all happening together, a mix of species. And we can lay that onto a functionalist perspective of emotion, and that the emotions are treated as distinct species, each of which is sensitive to unique environmental cues. So each has a particular functional role. And we could consider it the same way that if we remove one emotion, that the health of the entire system might be brought into question. Or if we bring too much of an invasive species, the health of the entire system might be brought into question. So really we're trying to change it to be from conversation about levels of emotion to the diversity of the emotions. Okay, so this is work together with a wonderful student of mine, Libby Benson, and she's made these beautiful maps, of which I passed around some of them. And the person on the left has low entropy, so they have a quite low diversity emotional experience, and the person on the right has high dimension. And these maps are going to come back over and over again here, so I hope it's understandable what's low and what's high diversity here. Okay, Angus Deaton won the Nobel Prize in economics last week, and a year and a half ago to another NIH-sponsored conference I was invited to, I was on a panel with him, just me and him together. And I thought they threw us together because we both did totally different things, and he works at the nation level, national well-being, and I work at the within person N=1 design level, and this was quite a contrast. So thinking about Angus and what a wonderful time it was meeting with him and trying to understand his perspective as being different from my perspective, we went into the European Social Survey and we pulled out 7 emotion items: enjoy, happy, common, peaceful, depressed, lonely, sad, and anxious. And we calculated this diversity score for each nation. So along the x-axis here, we have diversity of experience, and along the y-axis is the emotional well-being. This is given by the National Accounts of Well-being, so it's mostly positive emotion and a lack of negative emotion. And we can see that the Northern European countries are relatively homogeneous in their emotional experiences, so they have low diversity of emotional experiences. And Eastern Europe, in pink, has relatively high diversity of emotional experience. And the size of the dots is the between-person variance within the country of emotional diversity. So Ukraine and Bulgaria are relatively, all the people are relatively homogeneous in the diversity of their experiences. And Ireland is the winner of having a lot of diversity across people in within-person diversity. And trying to match to Angus's language, maybe we could call that emotional inequality or emotional privilege. So maybe the Northern European countries up here are in an emotionally privileged situation. Okay, so that's the nation level. We've done work that Rich talked about also of collecting data on cell phones. So people carry around the cell phones and they report multiple times a day on these data. And if we think of this as the nation here, then we're trying to get within each person all of these micro occasions that are going into that moment by moment, many times a day. Okay, so we take these data and we do the same thing. And we measure 20 emotions every evening. Each dot represents a person. Because of Susan's talk this morning, I was busy there trying to do the age analysis she was talking about. So green is younger adults. This is up to 18 to 35. Orange is young up to middle age, say, and purple is, say, 50 to 65, and above 65 is pink. And on the y-axis, I've changed here. So now this is stressor diversity, or diversity in the context in which people are existing. How many different things is the environment throwing at you? And now we see that mixed emotion, so greater mixed emotions are slightly related to the diversity of the context in which people are living. The size of the dot is the same thing. So we might expect that older adults would be over here with these smaller dots, but there seems to be relatively equal representation across the entire space. Now we've taken the nation level approach and we've applied it at the individual level, and I'm not sure what you would think of the way in which we've gone about this. That was supposed to be my joke, but I didn't. Okay, if we look within person here, and here I've just plotted 6 people. The background is daily reports of emotion, and we've calculated the diversity score there. at every single moment. So these people were giving ratings after they had interpersonal conversations. So they took Steve's experiment, they talked to somebody for more than 5 minutes, and they also made a rating there. And they are rating a diversity of experience within that set. And the blue line is the aggregate of the interactions they had across the course of the day. And you note that there are discrepancies between the within-day reports of diversity and the end-of-day reports. And I've highlighted one here, and I looked back at this interaction, and this was a very complicated interaction that the person had in the middle of the day. At the end of the day, they rated their entire day as not being diverse. But they had this really complicated interaction in the middle of the day. So whatever it was that they took out, this, what Steve mentioned of like the winner takes all, that is what happened on that particular day for that person. Okay, but you see the way the data are being constructed here. Now we can create maps of each one of these, and in the upper row we've taken the categorical ratings of the emotions and we made maps of those. And then here's just a selection of people on where they're living within a valence arousal space. So we've created this two-dimensional space and looked at the ratings there. And we can also see that some people are having very homogeneous emotions and other people are all over the place. Now I've labeled this as individual level and months because this is an aggregation across 63 days of time that were spread out over the course of 1 year. Okay, so now we've sort of gone from the nation level down to the within individual level. And now we can look at how the person's diversity of emotion changes across the different time scales. So we'll start off with years here. This is where the person is living. We've aggregated the data together and we're crawling through the data age by age. So we started off at 20 years old, now we're up to 50, pushing on 60 and 65. And the general trend here, this is raw data, the general trend is that there is a decrease in the size of the mountain with age. So the emotions are not changing in their means, but only the actual sort of variance, the entropy of this thing is shrinking with age as we go across time. So that's maybe how the mixture of emotion is changing across the adult lifespan. Here's one person, and James talked about after images, so there are 5 after images that are given here. The outside is positive stuff, and the blue stuff on the inside is negative stuff. And we want to think about this as sort of emotional fragility. When the negative stuff sort of pierces the positive stuff, then those would be the problematic periods. Okay, so now we have a whole bunch of things happening on the sort of moment to moment. This is across hours that we might say here. This is the kind of thing you can stare at for hours and come up with hypotheses about. Okay, now all those emotions are happening in a context, and before I had shown you on the y-axis stressor diversity. So this is what one person's stress life looks like across 63 days. Along the y-axis are 8 different types of stressors, and you can see that it's not a homogeneous experience that these people are having. This is quite a heterogeneous experience, and we're looking at ways to immerse people in the data. So we're going to try to immerse you into these data, and there's a whole set of work at this website, playingthearchive.com, where we've worked with musicians and with artists in order to come up with representations of the data that might be interesting. So I like club music, and I paired each one of these emotions with a sample, and these samples come from my musician friends Robin Shokowski and Joey Barron, and also a jazz band called Count Basic. So I'm going to try to play this for you, and I'm going to try to move the cursor along with where it is in the sequence. Okay, so we have 150 of these, which means that we can play a lot of music, and if you listen to them, they're all different. So there's a unique experience that each one of these individuals is happening. And together with Rachel Kofer, we just putting out a paper on stressor diversity and how that's related to stress reactivity. Okay, now to the dynamics piece. We have a grant to look at modeling self-regulation from infancy to 5 years old, and I want to present that here within the idea that there's approach and avoidance. So regulation is sort of the ability to influence a prepotent response by engaging in executive process. And the example I'm going to give is that you have approach coming in, or you have avoidance as your prepotent response, and you have your executive processes coming in, approach. They're going to help you go over that. So like this marshmallow task that you have a approach tendency, but you're working to get rid of that. So looking at seconds, and now this is a child who's engaged in a frustrating task in the laboratory, and second by second they've coded the emotions and different behaviors that this child was doing. And you'll notice that there are epochs, so this is a 10-second segment in which this child is expressing both sadness and anger. So that's a mixed emotion epoch. And then you have other epochs where there's a pure emotion. So even at the second level, and Steve showed it at the 5-second level, that there are mixtures of emotions that are happening, and those might fade into pure emotions. So this is the idea of where it is that we're coming from here into looking at these regulatory system dynamics. Okay, back to biology. The Lotka-Volterra equations have been around for a long time, and they're trying to understand, or they're being used to model how it is that two species are interacting with each other. So can we use that in order to look at how it is that you resolve a mixed emotion? So here joy and trying to do something with sad in order to get the person to a particular state. And here we're going to look at data that actually comes from two individuals, but I'm going to try to portray it here as though it's happening within a single person. And here's an animation to represent how that might be happening. And what it is that these model that one gets out of this sort of dynamic modeling that Steve has actually done a lot of work on. So here's our two emotions, and they're going along at an equilibrium state. And an event is going to happen, and it's going to drive the emotions into different places. And what the model is doing is it's recovering how long it is that it takes for that mixed emotional state to resolve back to an equilibrium state. So we have a goal where we're trying to get the emotions to. The mixed emotion is giving us some information, and then we get back to an equilibrium state. So looking at that here, this is with another student, Santiago Morales, who's looking at fear within children. And here in the age 2-year-old kids, this is a stranger approach task. Avoid is overwhelming approach. You can see that the red is coming back up after the blue has tried to squash it down. Whereas by age 5, that approach is suppressing the avoidance. So by age 5, we see that the dynamics are somewhat different. And we see now getting some information about the time course on which these events are happening. Now I'm going to go over like Steve because I just realized I actually have quite a few slides to get through still. Borrowing further, 2-dimensional framework, fish, spots, and stripes. Activator and inhibitor. So now co-regulation involves these two pieces. The activator gives you something, the inhibitor is trying to reduce that. It's characterized by lateral and long-range inhibition. So going back to our emotion space, can we integrate together the functionalist and core affect perspectives within using something like this model? So here, we're generating a simulation. We have random start values, and notice that spots, which are discrete emotions, emerge within the 2-dimensional space in idiosyncratic ways. Then the idea is that our cognitive systems then label those emotions in a socially appropriate manner. But there are idiosyncratic tendencies that are integrated here. And we can see then that you can produce a whole wide variety of these. From the biologists, they use this to look at the skins on animals. And we could interpret this as a covariance pattern. And each individual might have a separate covariance pattern, and that covariance pattern might change with age. So here we sort of created a lifespan starting from random values, and we change the way in which the dynamics of the system are working, how quickly the activator works, how quickly the inhibitor works, and what is the spatial orientation with which those work. We can see sort of discrete emotions or discrete characteristics evolve. They become more and more precise, then they start to blend together again in old age, so de-differentiation is happening, and you get complex emotional experiences back again towards the latter part of the lifespan. So that would be a very mixed emotional kind of quality. Okay, with Tim Brick, who was the talking avatar, I actually think this is the same data that Steve was presenting earlier. We can look at how it is that the emotions are organized, and we can create now two networks. And this is the jump. We were working in a landscape space, and the conceptual leap now is that the emotions don't need to be organized in a strict two-dimensional space, but we can make a more complicated space by putting them onto a lattice. And on that lattice, we can have an activator diffusion, so the blue, which means that when one of these emotions get activated, it's also going to activate its neighbors. And when one of these emotions gets activated, it's going to inhibit the emotions which are on the far side of the circle. And that activation and inhibition may be occurring at different rates and different spatial orientations. Now, it turns out that this still also does not operate on the, we can't recover the dynamics yet with these models, and it seems like that the model is not organized as a circle, but as a much more complicated space. But we can use the dynamics in order to extract out what that space might look like. If we can get data which is relatively continuous, then we might be able to come back at some of these models here. Okay, so the three things: mixed emotion into emotion diversity, trying to search for the timescales, and using the within-person dynamics in order to extract out how it is that mixed emotions both get activated and how long it is that it takes for them to resolve. Thank you.